What's up, Saints? How y'all doing? So today we're going to be playing and showing a clip of the debate I did with Godless Engineer on the existence of Jesus, and in specific talking about Josephus. And I want you to notice what I state in the clip and then the response from him, and then my response as well. If you want to check out when I challenged him further on the authority claim, feel free to check my video in the description below, in which I respond to that as well. But until then, let's dive right on into the video. One thing I wanted to start off is one thing that I noticed in the last debate that they had on this subject with Inspiring Philosophy, that I agree that, just because it's a majority position that Jesus existed, that alone shouldn't be a convincing case. What we should be looking at is the evidence, because, even the minority views should be challenged as long as there's compelling evidence. So I want to take the time to examine the evidence. And there's three places that I mainly want to go into. That is the New Testament documents, which I will get into, that I think are reliable eyewitness accounts. And so then there's Josephus and Tacitus as the main three forms of literary criteria. So I want to start with the issue of Josephus. The passage that has been known as in Book 18, Chapter 3, Section 3 of Antiquities of the Jews, where it says, "Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as to receive the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and Gentiles. And then Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the cross. Those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, and the tribe of Christians so named from him are not extinct at this day." Now, the issue is that going on here, that what I read to you was a abridged sort of version of this, based upon that in most of your translations, especially one done by a man named William Whiston, will include something like, "He was the Christ, for he appeared to them alive then the third day." This is an interpolation. These parts are interpolations that were inserted later, and there's a distinction between interpolation and forgery. Forgery is a type of interpolation, but not all interpolations are forgeries. But concerning the issue about this, even Louis Feldman, who was the leading Josephus scholar, did a survey of all these different people, gathering 139 different types of scholars, and a majority of them were in a partial division, while a minority was for, well, it's fully authentic and fully not authentic. But even then, just without that, examining why we consider this part of the actual passage is that this was a pattern of ancient historiography, especially that containing to Josephus. For example, Dr. Michael Grant, a classicist and author of the books on ancient history, noted in page 53 of the Greek and Roman historians, Information and Misinformation, the following quote: "A further main reason why ancient historiography differed from its modern counterparts was provided by digressions. They were far more frequent in the Greek and Roman writings than in our own. For one thing, there was a simple technical explanation for such digressions." And here's where it gets interesting. He says, "Nowadays we have footnotes. The ancients did not. So that what would now be relegated to a footnote or an appendix had to appear in the text. But there was a deeper philosophical explanation. The Greek and Roman historians wanted to supply background." So in that book, in that chapter, we see a lot is mentioned about Pilate, and Pilate does get mentioned here. And this isn't the first time that Josephus does this. He does this regarding several other figures in his works, in Book 18 and Book 20, for example. I'll pull some examples up later if we do go back down there. But even Mary Smallwood mentions in her translation of the Jewish Wars on page 2021 that one feature of Josephus' writing which may be disconcerting to the modern reader and appear inartistic is the way in which at times the narrative is proceeding at a spanking pace when it is unceremoniously cut short by a paragraph or a longer passage of material unrelated or only marginally related to the subject in hand, and then resumed equally abruptly. And so she explains the same thing, that this is basically, as she says, quote, "what we relegate to notes and appendixes appeared as digressions." So this simply was just a part of Josephus's ancient writing history. And for the examples, you can look at Book 18, chapters 2 and 5, where you see different places where the flow gets broken of the passage in trying to go about a certain figure, but only to provide background concerning the reader at his specific time.
Another thing is I really like how Christian anarchists, you started out by condemning an argument from authority, but then throughout your entire thing, you seem to use nothing but an argument from authority in order to substantiate the things that you're saying. Not that that's really all that different from most historicists, but I just thought that that was a little bit of a funny thing that happened there. As far as Josephus goes, there's more things concerning the Testimonium Flavianum that puts it into question. It's not just the broken flow of it, which I understand that you guys are a little bit more lenient with the whole broken flow thing, but the tone is completely different in that particular passage than in the surrounding passages. Not only that, but the passage just after it seems to reference the passage before it, being that it's referencing some kind of sad calamity or a sad thing that happened in the passage after the testimonium, which doesn't actually refer to the testimonium, but instead it refers to the paragraph just before it, because just before it, the Pilate had killed a whole bunch of Jews that were protesting him over some kind of water dispute. So, I mean, it interrupts the flow there. Not only that, but there's a lot of problems with it. Of course, you said that it was there were some interpolations that went on with the passage. I can give you the more, I guess, Jewish version of the passage, but it still doesn't explain why Josephus didn't go in and actually explain what the Christ is. At one point, you say that sometimes they include footnotes to include background information. That doesn't make sense because it only causes more questions to be asked rather than answering questions or giving background information, because his audience at that time wouldn't have known, what the Christ was to the Jews or what the Messiah was to the Jews, or several other things in the Josephine passage that there's a problem with. And then going again with the Josephine passage, it's very, very odd that there is nobody referring to this particular thing, this glowing reference to Jesus and Josephus, until like the 4th century with Eusebius. It doesn't show up in Origen or any other church documents or anything like that as a reference anywhere until the 4th century with Eusebius. Now, Eusebius has been known to forge a number of things in his own church's history, so it that puts it into suspect as well. And then you have the fact that there's really good evidence to show that the passage was actually copied off of Luke's. I'm not going to pronounce this right, but it's Luke's Emmaus or Emmaus narrative. It's the narrative after Jesus has risen from the dead, and you got 2 guys that are on the road to, I believe it's Damascus or something, and Jesus walks up to them and starts talking to them about this strange figure called Jesus. There's 19 total points in both of those stories that are that correlate to this testimonium. So it kind of seems like I mean that's very improbable that those 19 commonalities between the two would exist independent of each other. And then let's see, for the the more Jewish version of Josephus, it's been definitively proven by a historicist that all versions of that particular version of it stems from Eusebius. So the only version that we have of this particular passage in Josephus is by Eusebius. He's the first one to use it, to document it. The people that had the same documents from Josephus prior to that, being Origen, never mentions it, even though he has multiple reasons in which to bring up the fact that Josephus mentions Jesus. No, and it doesn't have to be against a mythicist or anything like that in his time in order for it to do that.
So I just do want to ask real quick about this particular passage in Book 18, Chapter 2, in which this reads from Josephus, "When Gratus had done those things, he went back to Rome after he had tarried in Judea 11 years, when Pontius Pilate came as his successor." Do you think this fits nicely with the book that's there, or what the quote is? Do you think there's anything suspicious about that?
I mean, I don't know the passage, so I mean, I thought we were discussing Josephus, like
Right.
the Testimonium Flavianum. So
Right.
I don't see a problem with that one.
Right. Well, the point is also that you see a bunch of generals and such being mentioned, or the prefix of procurators that are in succession here, and Pontius Pilate is then introduced into this as if he's, part of the story and all that. But then by the time you get to chapter 3, then it puts, but now Pilate, the procurator of Judea, almost introducing him as if he is a new character into the story. And this is why that seems to, for some people, they even, because of that, this one verse here, they consider this in the same way with the Testimonium Flavianum, because it seems like a patchwork that, well, if it's supposed to be Josephus, seems like he's being introduced formally in the next chapter, why treat him as if he's already been part of the story? So this is another part of the thing. When I say I'm citing all these people that point out that this is part of Josephus' style, I'm not just simply relying on an argument from authority. For one, I'm just simply citing the evidence in their own words, so that way I don't plagiarize or take their quote and try to make it mine when they deserve the credit for doing that work. And plus, whenever I cite that quote, I go into examples. I named a few by only titles and numbers, but I didn't go into the actual quote like I just did right there. So like I said, if you want more of these, I can supply those. Eusebius may have interpolated some of the Testimonium Flavianum, not forged. Like I said, there's a difference between the two. But again, we also have manuscripts that are outside of Eusebius, such as an Arabic copy, that are shorter and do not contain some of the suspected verses. And in the field of textual criticism, if you have a manuscript or a reading that is shorter, it's always assumed to be the earliest. That's always been the rule in any form of when we were looking at the early critical work.